Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Slow Art Friday. Today is June the 26th. My name is Christy McMillan. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement, and I am joined today by Sarah Reincke, one of our master docents, who will be leading today's conversation. Each Friday at 12 p.m. while the museum is closed, docents lead virtual interactive conversations about a few works in our collection or special exhibitions. The goal is simple. Slow down, discover the joy of looking at art, and talk about the experience with others. For today's program, Sarah will lead us in an interactive conversation about 3 artworks in the museum's collection. We'll spend about 15 minutes or so with each artwork. Sarah will allow us time to look at each work on our own, slowly, before leading a conversation about each one with questions. As participants, we encourage you to engage in dialogue with Sarah, myself, and each other throughout the hour. Just a few notes before we get started. You probably noticed as you were getting logged in that your microphone and video were muted by default. If you'd like to turn on your video at any time, you'd be more than welcome to do so, and I will let you know when you can unmute your microphone. A few tips for your best experience. Choose a quiet room and close the door. Please make sure to silence any alerts from nearby devices. If you do choose to have on your video, try not to sit in front of a window, lamp, or other strong light source, as it makes it difficult for us to see you. For best sound quality, use headphones and a microphone. While you can log in using your smartphone, we do recommend using a desktop, laptop, or tablet to see your slides and meeting tools on a larger screen. Make sure that your screen name includes your first name and last initial, or first name and last name. As this is a conversation, we do like to know who we're talking to, so it makes it easier if we can see your name. In order to make comments or ask questions throughout the hour, you'll be able to unmute your microphone when Sarah asks for questions or comments. We do ask that if you're not actively making a comment or asking a question, that you keep your microphone on mute. Another way to ask questions or make comments is to type into the chat box. A third way is to raise your hand in the participant sidebar. Either Sarah or I will call on you and unmute your microphone. This is usually the least efficient way to make a comment or ask a question, as these conversations tend to be pretty free-flowing and fast. Sometimes folks that have up their hand can wait for a while to be unmuted. So please feel free to jump in. We are recording today's program. If you prefer not to be recorded, make sure that your video and audio remain muted and use the chat box to submit questions and comments. Before we get started, does anybody have any questions? Okay, at this time, folks can unmute themselves or mute themselves at will. Again, if you're not actively asking a question or making a comment, please leave your microphone on mute. Sarah, tell us what we're going to be talking about today.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be here. I'm glad we've got a nice size crew, which makes me very excited. Today, we're going to be viewing and actively viewing a photograph and 2 lithographs. The theme is Land of the Sky, which is a North Carolina tagline. And I picked these pieces. I picked the first piece, and that then led me to my theme, because in my viewing, my active viewing, all 3 of these pieces, the sky plays a role, and we'll be talking about that. And also, just as a reminder, everyone might know, because we are recording, so will the things in the chat box be recorded. So if you send private messages, just remember, after the fact, they won't be private. So with that, I think we are ready to go. And so initially, let's just look at this piece. If you know, and you can enlarge it on your screen, of course, making our little boxes smaller, but it might be easier to look at the piece a little bit larger. And so let's just Let's just take a peek for about 10 seconds and actively look at all the different aspects of this photograph. So where is your eye drawn first? Where is the emphasis, in your opinion, of this photograph?
I'm drawn to the tree that appears to me to be floating in the sky, perhaps with its roots, the darkened against the light colored sky. So that's what I'm initially drawn to.
Okay, the roots. Roots are the first thing that your eyes are drawn to. Anyone else have that same reaction, or perhaps a different one?
Mine was definitely the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily the roots, but the fact that it's floating.
It's floating. Yeah, it definitely looks like it's even the roots. Do the roots look like they're going into the ground, or do you think that they look like they're resting on the ground?
I don't even think they're reaching the ground.
Okay, great.
And
Go ahead, Martha.
I would agree with that. The first thing I saw was the floating roots above the earth.
Okay, and the tree is quite prominent. Go ahead, Hope.
So it's just such a, like, there's just some oddities to this that I'm sure we'll get into, but I'd say after that tree, the front element that is sort of oval, and I don't quite know what it is, that was sort of where I went to next, I would say.
Okay.
I actually went to that part at the bottom of the image first, and because of everything that's going on in the world with the pandemic, my first thought was a mass grave, which I don't know why, but that was my first impression. That was my first thought when I looked at this several days ago.
So let's concentrate on that image that is appears to be in the water, floating out from the island. I'm sorry, who's speaking? Go ahead.
Barbara. I think it looks like a seed pod that you sometimes see hanging from trees. I want to get off that mass grave thing and get into
all right, so let's concentrate on that. If we concentrate on the white spots, what perspective does that image have?
I think to me it looks like seeds in a pod.
So more flat.
Right.
So if you concentrate on the column-like things, the dark vertical lines, what does that do to the perspective of that image? Does it change it at all?
It makes it more vertical.
It makes it more vertical. So that in itself, I mean, there are a lot of things going on in this photograph. And I did find it very, very interesting that that image could hold two perspectives. And I thought like people in a boat. And then the columns, do you think, do those relate to anything in the tree? If you concentrate on the columns so it makes it look more vertical, does that connect it to any other facet of the photograph?
Like seed pods from a tree.
Like seed pods from the tree. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And what about the sky? What role does that sky play in your reaction to this photograph?
Well, for me, there is no sky above the black tree is actually one of the largest mass there, besides the mirrored coastline, and the foreground is almost split down the middle. It's for me, it's a very odd perspective because there are clouds in the water and really no clouds above the mountains.
Yes. So it does, the clouds are not being reflected from the sky. Although that's the coloring of the water. And I do think that they look like clouds, but the stark whiteness, what role does that have, like on the mountains or on the tree itself?
I think it makes them more definitive. It makes them more stand out and pop out, and you're drawn to them because of the fact that the sky is so starkly white and blank.
Yes. Go
There
ahead.
are such, I'm sorry, there are such stark contrasts. It creates very definite contrast. And in looking at this and looking at the photographer, I did not realize that he was until I looked at it, he was the first photographer to really develop and perfect the photo montage genre and process.
He did.
And so
we'll get into that a little bit, because he certainly did not get the fame and acclaim when he started from the photography world.
It's just amazing if you look at all of the different levels and layers of this photograph.
Well, let's concentrate on those roots and talk about movement. So what do you see in those roots?
It's like they're trying to get down, to my eye. They want to go into something, into what's below. That appears almost to be an island until you really start looking at it, and then maybe it's the reflection of the tree, and I'm not really sure what that is.
So does anyone else have opinions about the roots?
Yes, actually I do. The land mass is a mirrored image. If you look straight from right to left, it's a mirror image of each other.
Mm.
For me, the tree is the leafy part in the top is a mirror image an image with leaves that mirrors the shape of the roots.
Mm-hmm.
That mirrors the shape of the roots. And
Let's see that.
Look at the dark edges around the part of the island that juts out.
Mm-hmm.
That too is kind of in the shape of a tree crown, and it can be reflective. Now, if you're looking at the roots, does anyone see movement other than going down?
To me, it looks like willowy and wispy, and sort of almost like a breeze is kind of going through them.
Right here.
And yeah, and it's almost like if you turned it upside down, what would those roots look like? Now, and forget about the top of the tree. Would that be, does it look like another tree?
Yes.
Looks like a tree with less leaves on it.
It looks like a tree with less leaves on it. That's kind of what I think too.
That's was what I was trying to express, but obviously didn't. To me, the roots reflect the top, only the top has leaves.
Yes, I would think so too. And you know, I probably look at these pictures a little bit too long. And the more you look, the more you see. So to me, there is an image of the trunk of the part of the tree that is its roots. And if you, as we were talking, if you turned it upside down, it would look like a tree without leaves. So you do see kind of a trunk. And someone had mentioned willowy, and I actually see a figure walking.
Oh.
With actually 2 legs, and you only can really see 1 arm. But that that is because I stare at it too long. And when that happens, for me, it's a really nice thing, because it makes it a much more intimate experience. And the wonderful thing about art is you're never wrong. So what you see is what you believe.
That's a new one for me, Sarah. I've never seen that, but as soon as you say it, of course, I can't unsee it. The chat box is blowing up. People have a lot of conversation and observations, but a lot of which have already been stated. Barbara P., you said roots usually mirror the shape of the tree in nature.
Well, I just read a book about trees called Overstory, and it was a very in-depth book, but many times the root system of the tree does mirror the shape of the tree. And sometimes even the leaf of a tree mirrors the shape of a tree. If you've ever noticed a maple leaf and look at a maple tree, it will have that shape. And oak trees, yeah, not pine, well, maybe even pine trees, but there's something about nature where trees replicate their shape.
Okay, everybody, the next walk you go on.
I don't imagine.
Take a tip from Barbara.
This is
so. What about the shading? I mean, and we can stay on the. Is there more to be said about the root system?
One thing that Billy had commented about, the idea of the roots going down, and that idea of needing to be grounded, I think is an interesting idea also. Needing to ground our own being. But there's a sense that the tree is floating up as well. So it's a sort of a balance between being grounded and then being in another kind of worldly, maybe religious space.
So, yeah, so what about balance? Particularly with the image that's in the foreground. Does that, what does that contribute to the overall aesthetic? Or is it something that is jarring?
I think it creates movement because everything else is fairly symmetrical from right to left and up and down. And it throws in another element. It's off balance. And so it creates movement of my eye around the image.
It does. I think it creates movement too. Anyone else?
It adds a level of contemplation that I might not have had about the tree and the landscape. It makes me question everything. And so then I begin to go into those layers that everyone's talking about.
Yes, and it takes active, this particular piece in my mind takes a lot of active viewing. And you really need to take, it looks like it might be kind of simple, but then when you look at it, you realize that that's not the case at all. And so this front image, that has a pattern. Do you see patterns elsewhere? And if so, where?
Well, I think the shape of the pea pod, if you will, in the forefront is similar to the shape of the landmass and the way it's pointed at the edges. And someone mentioned on the chat that they saw a boat with faces with arms raised. And once they said that, I could see that also in the pea pod, as if those could be people with their arms raised up.
And people came to my mind as well, like in a boat. But then my eyes are always drawn to the dark spaces. So then it becomes more like tree trunks. But I like the idea that he has different perspectives on just that little piece. What if that piece wasn't there?
Well, I was going to say that there's a sense of the boat-like shape is an unmarooned kind of shape, and the tree is an unmarooned shape as well, and the two are floating in their own existence, trying to maybe come together because of that sense of that roots coming down.
Well, it's interesting too that everything else is, with the exception of the tree being floating in the air, is all very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yet that part is not, and it's, you know, I look at it and try to figure out what it is, and it doesn't go with the rest of what we're seeing. And I'm also looking, if I may mention, and you may have already mentioned this too, the mountains in the background, they're mirrored. It's the same, I don't know what the photographic term is, but it's the same mountains on both sides.
Both sides, right. What do the mountains give us? I mean, how does that enrich the photograph?
This is Hope. I mean,
go ahead, Hope.
I think, I mean, thanks for pointing out the mirror image, because you're right. I mean, I think it does two things. I think it gives balance, and I think it stretches your eye left to right, or just, you know, horizontally. I think that I'm struck by sort of the three different layers in, I guess, the upper half, with that front that looks like growth, and then sort of that second layer that looks just like gravel and rock, and then the third to me is sort of the mountains that clearly have snow on them. So
yeah, and so our eye is like carried through the whole photograph. What if it were a plane, flat?
I think the mountains provide some stability to what we're looking at,
mm-hmm.
As opposed to the two big floating items.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. And why does the water look like clouds? Or maybe it's pollution.
I think it's reflection.
You think it's reflection?
It appears to be reflection. And I am looking at this work online from his website. Is there in the piece that we have a second tree floating on the right? Okay. I'm looking at a different different work. It's the same work, but he's added a floating tree on the right. So
wow.
We might want to go.
Cool. So yeah, we'll all be hunting that down, Billy. Be nice and put the web address in the chat box.
I will.
I love fun homework.
Sarah, there's two really interesting comments over in the chat box. One is from Judy, and Judy, feel free to unmute yourself. But you asked the question, once we see people, have we stuck ourselves into a figurative image? Does seeing people stop us because it dominates our perceptions? I think that's really interesting because, you know, the past couple of weeks we've looked at a fair amount of abstract artwork and really put figures or put recognizable things in it. And I'm thinking, you know, that's a very human impulse to do that, but what are we losing, Judy is asking, by not sort of accepting it on its own terms and trying to insert figuration into it? Judy, do you care to comment further?
That was very well said. I guess I would only add that I think it's very natural for us to try to make recognizable objects out of everything we look at. Mm-hmm. And faces and people above all, because we're a social species. And for me, it often is disturbing when I recognize a face or a person in a painting, because then I can't, as someone said, oh, Christy, you said I can't unsee it. And it keeps me from being able to explore the objects and the relationships between the lines and the shapes and all this stuff in other ways. I really object to it and try not to do it, but other people seem to love, like Sarah, you loved seeing the person walking. And, I'm trying not to do that.
So yeah, I think it's, oh darn it, hang on here. I'm sorry. Let me at least unhook it. I thought I turned the volume down.
The joys of live virtual programming.
No, my little phone is smarter than I am, apparently. You know, if we do consider those as people with their hands up, do they have a role? What do you think? Why would they be having their hands up if you wanted to go down that road?
They could either be praising the landscape, or it could be a protest about
Yes.
climate change in this current situation. Obviously, this was made much longer ago than either of those concerns that have taken precedence today. But they do seem to be cheering or praising something with hands risen.
Yeah, actually, and we're gonna, is there anything else that we would like to say? I want to share a little bit about the artist before we move on to the next piece, but I don't want to cut anyone short.
Well, I just noticed that they look like they're wearing hoodies, and as I look at it, they look like they're like head to head, but alternating. Like there's one body that goes up, and then the next one comes down. One goes up, the next one comes down.
So this is done in 1970. So I think that there were environmental concerns. His last name is pronounced Ullsman, and he was really, as I think Billy said, someone said, he was one of the first who really played around in the darkroom. And he would take several different negatives and just play around with them. But he took away all the edges of those different negatives so that it would look like one piece. Now, when the photography world didn't think that it was true, pure photography, because he was manipulating it in the darkroom, whereas now he is pretty much considered a pioneer of digital. And so he was just, even in 1970, he was a little ahead of his time. One of the things about all his pieces is it requires a lot of active viewing. And people see many of his pieces in a number of different ways. And I think that that is one of the things that Mr. Ullsman really wanted. He wanted to see different reactions from the same piece. One of the ways that he was able to make these pieces is he discovered a way to calibrate negatives on an enlarger, and then he blended them together. And so all of his work is done in the darkroom. And he creates juxtapositions on purpose. And that is one of the things that makes his photographs, the perspective of his photographs look so surreal, because most of his photographs do look surreal. So is this a picture that you might want in your home?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love the yeses and nos. This is like my favorite part. And because every piece is going to have people saying, no. And every piece is going to have people saying, heck yeah, I want it in my bedroom so I see it when I wake up. So I really like this piece. Okay, and if we are finished, let's move on to the next piece, Christy. Okay, and let's take about 10 seconds to thoroughly and actively view. So I'm going to start each piece the same way. What is the emphasis here? Where is your eye?
The
Mine
upside,
goes to the flag.
I'm
The
sorry,
upside down flag.
say again.
The flag.
The flag. Anyone else?
The middle division between the blue and the brown, and I sort of go back and forth because it's almost a mirror image again. It's not, but it sort of plays on that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the other element is the moon or the earth or whatever that is.
So, all right. Anyone else as far as the emphasis and what your eye sees first?
yeah, I too go to the background.
Which
To the
background?
blue, to the blue and the brown.
To the blue and the brown.
First go to the blue where it's close to the brown, and then up to the moon, and then down to the flag that's discernible as a flag below.
Okay, and why do you say that? Do you know why your eye might go to the blue first?
I think it's the most prominent color. It's the biggest slab of color. It's a really rich color.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the background, I mean, the way that the blue is separated from the brown, it actually looks like it could be the edge of a planet or the edge of an earth or the edge of, like a deep blue night sky and then the brown earth below it. And so it's kind of, I can kind of make those connections, familiar connections out of it.
Right, right.
Well, the intensity and also that what appears to be, I'll call it the moon, that sphere in the upper right-hand corner creates a greater intensity. But I also see that we're calling it brown, but yellow is the complementary color of blue. And there's a lot of yellow in the brown. So because the intensity of the blue is so true, it pops it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay, does anyone else that we haven't heard from?
I noticed the numbering, the fact that at the bottom it's signed and numbered, as if there were multiples of these. I can't tell if it's
the lithograph.
Yes. It is the lithograph, and I think the number is 17. Okay. I'm not. Yeah, I believe that it's the 17th of the series. So the sky and the earth, let's say, are divided right down the middle, right in the middle of the piece. And I like the idea that somebody said that it could have been a planet. That's not something that I had thought of before, so that's pretty cool. So the blue is very, very dark. Does that have any indication to you about like time of day? What would it look like if it was lighter blue?
Earlier.
It would look earlier?
Well, the first thing I thought of was outer space and as Barbara put in the chat box, the moon landing.
Yeah.
And my feeling was that the brown and the flag, because that was planted on the moon, that's the moon, but it doesn't really make sense because then Earth is white. So I haven't quite figured that out. But it symbolically immediately hit me as evocative of the moon landing.
Okay.
It's also interesting the way it's divided vertically as well as horizontally by the poles that the flags are attached to. And that the one flag is definitely, you can see the stars and you can see the lines, and the other is just blurred. You can't tell what that reflection is, if it's the same flag, a reflection, a different flag.
So do you, let's talk about that flag, the upside down one. What are your impressions of it? Is it on the earth? Is it under the earth? Is it buried?
You can see through it, so it's transparent, and it's in front of. But the other thing it does, the blue balances the larger blue space above, almost. I mean, that has spots of white, and this has the specific. But I put my fingers over that blue, and it really is important in terms of the balance. We talk about the divide down the middle, the divide across, and then the two flags, and then the blue space, and that smaller tiny blue space all is really a part of the balance. It's plays with balance, much like the one we just saw.
Well, and it appears to have no gravity. I mean, because I think that's where my head's going but it's very straight. It has no gravity on the top. Although it appears to have a little movement on the top, there's none on the bottom.
Right. So what about the use of negative space, particularly on the bottom? Does it create any kind of movement?
Sarah, in the chat box, Sherry had a really interesting not Sherry, Ellen Feingold had a really interesting comment about the brown, and I'm wondering if you could maybe unmute your microphone and share. You had said that it felt to you like graves or dead soldiers.
Yeah, my first impression, especially looking at these two faces as we're talking about animating things, these two faces that look like they're wearing helmets, and even I could see more. The first thought that I had were dead soldiers buried underground. Am I going in a dark direction there?
No. So let's explore that a little bit. What do you find meaning in the flag that is upside down, that doesn't look like it's waving in the air?
My first thought when I saw this painting was of Vietnam and how the flag became such a tricky symbol during that time. And, people were doing all kinds of things with the flag and getting people very upset. And so when I saw this and I saw what I see are the soldiers and the flag upside down, then my first thoughts were kind of a Vietnam.
Also, I saw the flag as backside two. So I looked up backside two flag, mirrored images of flags, and it turns out that soldiers actually wear the mirrored image of the flag on their right hand shoulder because I can't remember the exact reason, but it's not desecration of the flag to have it in a mirrored image.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you, Martha. I appreciate that.
I also see it as static. It is static and straight, and the image in the top undulates in my eyes. So there's a dichotomy there of one is waving and one is static.
So what about the flag that is up in the blue? When you look at that, how does it affect you? What do you see?
So to me,
oh, go ahead, Laurel. Someone else was speaking?
I'll just be quick about it. To me, the flag in the blue is more of a solid object. It has movement because of the blur, and the flag below is like a stencil. It's transparent in the white stripes, and it looks more like a drawing of a flag or a stencil of a flag than the flag up above, which has more life.
The flag up above has more life. Okay,
Yeah.
anyone else?
Sorry, Laurel, then Kathy.
Okay.
No, I don't think I started to speak. That's okay. I do, but I do think that the flag has up at the top has motion and movement to it, and the one at the bottom again, the transparency and the just the stillness of it isn't moving. Where there is definitely movement to me in the top.
So with the mirrored image of the flag, and you have this blurred one that seems to be up in the darkness and in the night sky, and then you have the other flag where we do see the stars and the stripes. What about the position of those two flags? Does that bring forth any emotions, any thoughts or comments?
So Kathy, Barbara, then Billy. Go ahead,
Thank
Kathy.
you, Christy.
Well, it's related to what you were just asking about, Sarah, because what I see remarkable in this is if you divide it down the middle vertically, and you have those two halves, the half on the right has many of the dominant elements in it, with the flag and the moon/earth, that white circle. Right. The half on the left has very little in it. And so that undulating image of the flag is very important, and it's very powerful. I find that quite remarkable when you look at the contrast between those two halves.
I agree. I think that they're saying very different things.
Barbara P., you're muted. There you go.
What I was thinking goes along with what everybody's saying. I think that it is contrasting the glory of the moon landing in '69 and with the horror of the Vietnamese War. I think it goes along with that. I don't know when it was done, but for me, that's what my mind wants to make sense of it. The stiffness of the flags are like the flags that were planted on the moon, because there is no gravity, although the one on the top does have some movement to it, and it's obscured, and maybe that's why the earth is obscured, because the glory of the moon landing was obscured by the terror and horror of Vietnam. I said a lot, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
But that's how it makes me feel.
And then is there one more comment, and
Billy.
then we'll move on, and I'll tell you a little bit about the other.
I am really appreciating all of these very philosophical thoughts about this. And as I look at it now, originally when I was looking at it, I was seeing kind of a reflection or the same image duplicated. Mm-hmm. I don't see any relationship now at all.
Yeah, I think Sarah's about to blow
That's
mind on
fun.
that too.
You start in one place and you end up in another. That's
right.
A nice thing. Let me tell you a little bit about the artist. His name is James Rosenquist. It's called The Mirrored Flag. It was created in 1971. So the comments about the moon landing and the course of human nature with the Vietnam War, I think that both of those are reflected in this piece. It is a lithograph, and this, when you add color to lithograph, it is a much, much more complicated process. And he had to use many, many stone plates in order to make this particular image. This is a picture of the piece, a photographic picture of the piece. And Christy, if you will show a more accurate picture. So this is really what it looks like if you were to see it in person. And this is one of the most stark differences I've come across when looking at a photograph or looking at the real photograph. So this is mylar, where the flag that is closest to the moon, that is silver mylar. And it is such a reflective surface that it is very, very hard to capture it in a photograph. So when you go to the museum and when this picture is on display, this is what you're going to see. And I just was floored by the fact that it was so different. And if we look at this, the same types of contrast can be made as far as the flag that's in the deep blue is a stripped version of the flag that is underground or down below, and a little sad. Mr. Rosenquist was known as a pop artist, but he called himself anti-pop because he never was drawn to logos or brands or movie stars that the other pop artists tended to concentrate on. So he always was questioning the role of marketing, and he was questioning the coverage of the war. His pieces do tend to be a little bit more opinionated and with his own opinion. So I thought that as a piece of pop art, that this was significantly different than my previous knowledge or interpretation of what pop art is. And basically pop art is, the concept is that there is no hierarchy of culture and that art may borrow from any source has been one of the most influential characteristics of pop art, which kind of goes to the Andy Warhol or the Lichtensteins. Mr. Rosenquist was a lot more motivated by getting a message out there. Okay, so hopefully we'll go and see that in the museum sometime soon. And our last piece, oh, and this one, I love this piece. So let's look at it. And I've let us run out of time a little bit. So I just want you to look at it briefly. So what's the mood here?
I'm drawn to the little house up in the top left corner there, with looks like a storm of some sort, or clouds hovering above it, or some sort of weather coming in to sweep it away almost.
And compared to the other two pictures, what's different about the role that this sky might play? Is it a big part of the picture or a little part of the picture?
I think the lighting is a huge part of the picture. Mm-hmm. and the lighting sets the mood. And this is a much more realistic picture. You can make a story out of this, mm-hmm. whereas the others, the story is not so evident.
So clear. And this one does tell a story. What do you think the man's story is?
I want to go home. Get out of the rain.
Hard work.
Yes.
Hard work.
Yeah. So what kind of day do you think that this gentleman had?
Tough.
Tough. What makes you say that?
Well, you have several things. One is his posture. Second is the mules and the plow. The weight of whatever he's carrying in the vessel that is causing that posture. And then also he is, if you look at the lines and the undulating, and this is what I love Thomas Hart Benton, mm-hmm. And his work, because, you know, he was definitely one of the, as you know, a consummate regionalist. But look at the dark clouds on the right-hand side that are over his head. And then as your eye goes up, the field lightens, as does the sky. And so there's, in much of his work, there's hope.
Hope. Okay, anyone else?
The left-hand bottom looks like there's a number 2 on the post to me. I don't know the significant meaning.
It is. So what would that normally, what is the first thing that you think of when you see a number near a house?
House number.
House number.
Mm-hmm. Or an address. So do you think that this gentleman owns the land?
No.
And why do you say that?
That's an interesting question, an interesting reaction on my part. I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to.
Well, what about the condition of the man and the condition of his animals?
The animals have, slumped back, so they're obviously, maybe toward the end of their life, or else they've just been worked really hard. And his position, as Billy was saying earlier, looks like he's got the sack over his back. But another positive thing I think about it is it's very rhythmic in all the lines. It's like a Van Gogh kind of line use that almost brings the idea of song to labor, much like, again, the slaves in the South that would sing as they were in the middle of labor, just to make the day go by with a little bit more pleasure than just the hard labor. So to me, it plays, into that idea, although it's probably more Midwestern than it is Southern.
I think he's looking at the weather. Like
the gentleman. He has his head kind of turned.
Weather. It definitely looks like the end of the day. You'd think returning home just because of that address piece. But the mules and the man look relatively tired.
And what ethnicity do you think the gentleman is?
Not really clear.
I thought he was white. I thought he was Caucasian, white, tanned.
That was my first instinct, but you raising the question made me look more closely.
Yeah. What about his bag? Does it look full?
Not really. And this work was done post the Great Migration. And so if I look at that and know what the hope of the Great Migration is or was, and then I look at the work that he's doing, Benton's work was about work being done in the Midwest, not the South. Here's, to my eye, here's a man who maybe had come out of the South during the Great Migration, and he's back in the field.
Yeah, and hopefully, if he might be a sharecropper. He might own it. This was created in 1938, and I think that this is one of those pieces that, like the Rosenquist, when it was created, has some bearing on his intent for the piece. So what was happening in 1938?
The Depression.
The Depression.
Also, the beginning of the Second World War, was on the forefront.
The New Deal, wasn't the CCC then too?
Yes. And so, and do you think that that is his home over in the left? Is he heading home?
Hard to tell, to me.
What about the land? Does it look plentiful? And the line here where the grass or crop compared to the cut part, was that his work?
It's not indicated in what's in his bag.
Mm-mm. But what are the donkeys pulling, do you think?
A plow.
A plow.
A hand plow. You can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And which was the way in which some, the car industry was in place by then, but in terms of tractors, there were a lot of hand plows still, and it does look plentiful, actually, I think, in terms of the field work.
Okay. And somebody had mentioned movement, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to have to. Oh, the hour goes so fast. So where do you see movement in this picture?
Everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere. And so point out a few.
The rolling hill,
Mm-hmm.
the tree, the clouds.
The clouds.
Even the grass, or whatever that is.
Going up.
So it's like he's got movement. He's moving also. Everything has moved.
Everything is moving. That's one of the things that I really liked about this piece. Christy, if you'd show the credits. So this is called Approaching Storm, and created in 1938. What do you think does that title hold? What meaning does that title hold?
Well, that certainly does forewarn of the war.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It does. And is this a piece that you would like in your home?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think I'd like all three of these pieces. Mm-hmm. But this one I did choose because the sky is such a smaller portion, proportionately, of the whole piece. The other two pieces that we looked at, the sky was so prominent. And in this one, it plays just as big of a role. It's even in the title, but actually in the piece itself, it comprises a much smaller area. And he was able to make it a focal point without it necessarily being a major proportion of the painting. So I think that we are out of time. So quick.
It always happens. I mean, Sarah, you've made some really great selections today, and I think that is evident by the fact that we didn't feel like we had enough time with any of them. I mean, we had so much time with the first one, and I think that there was so much more to be said about the second and the third. I don't know, maybe we can come back to these same ones in another program. There's just so much to say.
There is, and I appreciate everyone's responses. And I always hate to cut people short.
Yeah, I know. I so look forward to the time when we can be back into the museum and see these in person, because, there were a lot of great points there at the end about the Rosenquist and how, seeing it in a reproduction, you lose that whole part of talking about that reflective square flag. And, so maybe we can, do that for an art break. Just look at that particular artwork in the museum when we're able to be together again. As always, thank you all so much for sharing your feedback and your thoughts and your impressions. These were really rich works that Sarah chose. And I think that we probably could have stayed on for another hour just to talk about them. So we will actually not have a Slow Art Friday next week. We are going to take a Independence Day vacation so that we can all get some rest. We've all been very busy over here at the museum, but we will return on July the 10th. We will be led by Doris Potash in a conversation about Depression era prints. So this particular print is a really good segue to that discussion. We will look at 3 additional Depression era prints on July the 10th. So as you know, we start taking RSVPs for Slow Art Friday about a week before the program. So if you're interested in that July 10th program, start reaching out to me next week. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful holiday week. We look forward to seeing you and virtual programs the following week, and we will definitely keep you updated on the reopening of the museum. As you know, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper kept us in phase 2, which precludes the museum reopening. So we'll see what he has to say the week after the next Slow Art Friday to see if we will continue to be in the virtual space or be able to be together in the museum. As I said, have a great weekend. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Happy July 4th.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.